He has acre. Let's go.
I went to Catholic school when I was younger. I went for kindergarten, and my sister went for kindergarten, first and second grade. And it wasn't my parents just wanted us to have a Christian education, and I don't know what happened. We weren't allowed to go to mass, so like we all had to go in the library. I felt like it was weird because I remembered, even though it was kindergarten, and I felt like we were in like the yard in prison. Like I would see my sister, like, I haven't seen you in so long, and it was every Wednesday. And then I don't know what happened. I think they might have increased the tuition for people that weren't parishioners, and so we ended up in public school. This was in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and if I tell you guys some stories about, you'll swear I was raised in the 50s. So like we had a traveling minister that we would have once a month, and our church didn't have indoor plumbing. It had outhouses. So I would be dressed in in the SDA religion on my Saturday best. Yeah. And if I had to go to use the bathroom, I had to go to the outhouse, and there's a rusty nail with the toilet paper on it. Yes. And there's a hole in the ground. And I actually, when we had the memorial service for my grandfather, Kylis's great-grandfather, I went back to that church because that's where all my relatives are buried. It's called Union Hill, like on my dad's side and my mom's side. My parents still own plots there. I just was actually on them the other day. I'm like, are you really going to be buried back there? Because you haven't lived there in 35 years. Yeah. So, but I went back there, and I showed my kids and my wife. I'm like, see, because the outhouses were still there, and the church is still in operation, and it still doesn't have indoor plumbing.
Jeez.
Yeah.
You can go say, hey, I wasn't lying.
Yeah.
That's what I had to go through.
But we would go, so my grandfather eventually built his own church. Like he built his own church. But before that, we used to rent the Union church, and we would go there every Saturday. And when the traveling preacher wasn't there, my grandfather would preach. And he never went to, what do you call it?
Like ministry.
Yeah, he never went to school for it. He doesn't even have a college. He didn't even have a college degree, but he would come up with. And the thing about the SDA religion is all of the lessons are kind of centrally planned. So the Central Conference, which is based out of, I believe it's somewhere in Michigan, where Southern is, and where Andrews University is. They'll send out lesson plans for like they call it Sabbath school, not Sunday school. So kind of all the kids are taught kind of from the same lesson plan. And I don't know if that had to do with sermons or not. I don't think so, because when we eventually moved out here and I started attending the church out here, the sermons were unique. You know, you would go to it wasn't like everybody they were preached the same thing. But yeah, that was an experience growing up in Pennsylvania and going to that church with no indoor plumbing. And yeah,
for sure. I'm going to throw a quick intro out here, and then we'll jump straight into it.
Sure.
So welcome back to Just Like You Me podcast on the road. We're here with Ben Neal. Ben, it's great to have you. Thanks for having us in your home.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for coming out, guys.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is a great office.
Oh, appreciate it.
Did you like how our voices, like everyone's voices changed a second? Like we go, oh, we're actually recording now?
Oh, yeah. So we get, my wife calls it my public speaking voice. Yeah. Usually I drop it down an octave, but.
Yeah, say, hello, how nice to meet you. Yeah. But Ben, so as you might know, we talk about like faith and formation stories. We like to go where people started, where they're at, where they're going, and just kind of see what they did right, with the lessons they might have learned.
Sure.
So we're to talk a little bit about how you grew up in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, for the first 10 years, yeah.
So and then you were Seventh-day Adventist at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about like what you kind of learned there.
Sure. So my grandfather, my mom's father, I don't know how the Seventh-day Adventist religion came to our family. I actually posed this question to my mom recently, and I can't really pinpoint who was the first SDA. So I don't know how much you guys know about the religion. Just a brief cliff note. So there was a guy in the 1840s named Joseph Miller. Have you ever heard of the Millerite movement?
Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of sprung off the Millerite movement. You're familiar with that?
No.
Okay.
In New York, right?
It was somewhere in New England. I think, it might have been New York. So basically Joseph Miller, he thought he figured out when the second coming of Jesus was going to happen. And it was sometime in I think it was in 1844, I believe is when he pinpointed the date. And he basically did a math equation based off of, and I'm not a theologian, so anybody who's listening and I get some dates wrong or something, I apologize. But he looked at Daniel 8:15, I believe, where it says, in 10,000 years shall the sanctuary be cleansed. He thought the sanctuary was earth and being cleansed was the second coming. So this was a big deal. Like, people like left their crops in the fields and sold all their stuff and were on their rooftops. I remember when I was a kid watching an SDA produced movie on what they refer to now as the Great Disappointment, because obviously it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So SDA religion. So when it didn't happen, he said, okay, I think it's actually next year. I think I accidentally screwed up the year, so it's going to be next year. And well, it didn't happen again, and the Millerite movement kind of dissolved. And I believe there was a few different religions that came from it. I believe Jehovah's Witness was actually one of them, and the SDAs was one of them. And there was a woman by the name of Ellen White and her husband, and Ellen White would have these visions that she called them. Somebody, there's been hypothesis that she might have been suffering from epilepsy or something like that. But anyway, she would have these visions, and they would travel around and like basically perform for money. And so they eventually settled in Michigan, I believe, and they started what is called the Seventh-day Adventist religion. So the Millerite movement was kind of went away. They kind of explained it away a little bit, where they said, oh, well, the cleansing didn't happen down here. It actually was an event that happened in heaven. And that's the way it was explained to me when I was a kid. It was that, and initially they called it, I don't remember what it was called, like the shut door policy. So they had like this doctrine that said, if you weren't saved by the second coming or the 1844, the cleansing, then you weren't going to heaven. Well, then they started getting more members, and they're like, well, wait a minute, what about us?
Yeah.
So they kind of changed, they kind of explained that away. But there was several books that were written by Ellen White that were kind of taught alongside of the Bible. One of them was about the second coming and the basically the rapture, what they would, and then the events that would come before the rapture, which was called the time of trouble, which is very interesting, because basically we were taught that the Catholic Church and the Pope would unite with a world government and create a law that said you had to worship on Sunday, and if you didn't worship on Sunday, you would be rounded up. And so I was taught that Catholics were going to hunt me down and kill me, basically. Does that surprise you, Mike?
Yeah, it does. I'm the homeschooled, like, sheltered guy.
Sure.
No,
so, but here's the funny thing about SDA is it's very, like, how strict they are is very regionally based. So, for instance, you'd be surprised to know that I was brought up as kind of what I would refer to as a liberal Seventh-day Adventist. Like, you're more conservative Seventh-day Adventists, they have a particular way of dressing. They don't dance. They don't go to movies. Ellen White didn't like movie theaters. There's very little like clapping in the sanctuary for like a performance was considered uncouth. You would say if somebody did something amazing, everybody would just in unison say amen. When I was a kid, at my little subversive activities, if somebody did something awesome, I'd go one of these and I'd start a clap, because clapping is contagious, right? And then I would just sit back and I'd be proud of my creation. But you can go to there's like cities in America that are almost all completely SDA. There's a lot of them in California. There's definitely a lot of them in Michigan. And you would think our proximity to Michigan, we would be a little more on the conservative side, but that's not the case. I mean, so to kind of go back to the beginning, so I went to the SDA church in Pennsylvania with my mom and my dad and my sister, and it was very small. The congregation was basically our family, and then like maybe I'd say there's 20 people at the most in that church, right? And to touch back on like some of the SDA doctrine and like Ellen White and stuff, that really wasn't, I didn't really even know about Ellen White until I was like 9 or 10 years old, and we moved to Toledo. And I had a third or fourth grade teacher that would kind of like teach us some of the Ellen White doctrine, but we didn't really learn it. My grandpa didn't really preach it very much. The traveling ministers didn't really talk about it. So as far as I knew, the only difference between me and like a standard Protestant was that we went to church on Saturday and we didn't eat pork. That was a big thing. So SDAs follow like the Leviticus laws of the dietary laws. Mm-hmm. It's very similar to what Jewish people do, only you take the kosher aspect out of there. So there's no like restrictions on eating like beef and a glass of milk or the cow doesn't have to like be ritualistically slaughtered or anything like that. But no pork, no shellfish, no birds that can fly, no like fish without scales, so you can't eat like shark. But just to give you an example of how my dad would hate if I called him liberal, but just to tell you how liberal my parents were. Like we would go out to Delaware and go fishing, and if somebody caught a shark, we would eat it. Yeah, you know. So we went to someone's house when I was a kid, and they made everybody shrimp. And my parents didn't want to be rude, so we ate the shrimp, which I thought was awesome. It was the first time I ever ate shrimp. Yeah, and you know, that just shows you kind of how they weren't really that strict on it, you know? And so then we moved out here in 89 or 90, and it was a lot larger of a community. The church congregation was 250. I went to the Adventist school for the first time when I was in third grade. I went from third to seventh grade. And it was around seventh grade, eighth grade that my parents really started kind of laxing on the Adventist rules. And they have left the church. They left about 3 years ago. I left when I was in my early 20s. I'm still technically a member of the SDA church. I still get the mailers and everything. I didn't like, you know, call them and say, let me see. Yeah, so I started going to the SDA school in third grade, and I started learning more about like Ellen White and like a little bit more of the tenets of the religion and how much different we are than it. I started to realize, no, it's not just Protestants that go to church on Saturday and don't eat meat. Well, like very strict Adventists don't eat meat. They don't drink coffee. They don't eat sugar, like not sugar. They don't eat chocolate because it's got caffeine in it. Ellen White didn't like caffeine. No drinking. Body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. No drinking. Overeating, they didn't seem to have a problem with that because we had potlucks every Saturday.
That's what the lodge.
But then the other restriction too was that there would be no secular material from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, the Sabbath, right? So that would fluctuate. In the summers, it really stunk because it was 8 o'clock, right? But in the winters, 5:30, you know, we would get these movies that were published by this company called Focus on the Family, which is actually Mormons. But they didn't like push Mormonism. They were just like wholesome stories with God in them. And those were the movies we were allowed to watch during Sabbath. And I convinced my parents that the Swiss Family Robinson Disney movie was Christian because after the pirate ship, they prayed on the beach. I was like, see? Yeah. I was like, ignore them. The whole family gleefully murdering the whole ship full of pirates at the end. Like, so... but then like when I was in middle school, they started to lax. So they finally let me play baseball. I wasn't allowed to play baseball because all the games were on Saturdays. So they started letting me play baseball. And then in high school, all of the dances are on Friday nights. So they started letting us do that. And then eventually like, yeah, they'll turn on MTV, test it out. Yeah, we're good. All right. And then, yeah, so we weren't very strict from about middle school on. And then
you said you like left like the church when you're in like college in your 20s. What kind of like started that, and where did that take you?
So the minister for the SDA church, Pastor Yoon, great guy. And I first off, I do want to say like I still talk to a lot of folks in the church, all great people. I have nothing bad to say about any of them. So Pastor Yoon, great guy, South Korean guy, I believe. He would literally drive to my dorm room at University of Toledo and pick me up for church. The minister of the church would pick me up to make sure that I was still going. And eventually I was in college Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. I really didn't want to get picked up by a minister. So I eventually stopped doing that. And then I moved to Illinois for a couple of years. I didn't go to SDA church out there. And then when we came back to Toledo, I started resuming going to the SDA church when I was like 22, 23. And after being away from it for so long, and doing my own reading, and I was kind of disillusioned with it. When my children were born, we started kind of going back and forth between the SDA church. So this is now I'm in my 30s. So I'd still been going, but it was more to, for my mom than anything, I think. And I did get a lot out of it. The sermons are good. our church, again, like I said, it was more of a liberal SDA church, so we didn't get the indoctrination of like Ellen G. White. They started having meat at potlucks there for a while, which was crazy. Meatless meatloaf. And have you ever had one of those vegetarian hot dogs?
I have not.
Oh God, they come in cans.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's what it's like. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, and I remember my dad and I sitting there watching the SDA people eating these hot dogs, and we're just like, there's nothing wrong with what we call a Jew tube.
Yeah.
The beef, the Hebrew International.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I kind of stopped going, and then my kids were born, and my wife and I were going back and forth between the Catholic Church and her parents, and then we would take our kids to the Sunday school for the little kids, where they just sing songs and the songs you guys probably learned too when you were little. And then after a while, I was like, we need to pick a side, because I don't want my kids to be like conflicted and pulled between two worlds. Mm-hmm. And I knew enough about the SDA religion and enough about the Catholic religion that I'm like, they're already going to Catholic school. I think we'll just pick this path. But I had already kind of mentally checked out of the SDA religion when I was about 23, 24. And then I kind of just officially decided in my head, like I didn't do it on paper, but I'm making a break. And we've been going to Catholic Mass here if Father Eric listens to this, he'll disagree that I go every Sunday, but we try to go every Sunday. And he actually asked me when I was going to convert a couple of months ago. And I said, I think the way I phrased it was, I'll play your game, but I don't really want to join your team, if that's okay. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't really feel like if somebody comes up to me and tells me we have all the answers, because SDA is kind of a remnant church. They're like, no, we are the chosen people, kind of like Jews are. And I disagree with them. I disagree with a lot of their philosophy and their doctrine. And there's no way I can just jump into another one and be like, oh, you guys must have all the answers. And so that's why I've been kind of hesitant to join. I feel as though I'm a member of my parish's congregation, but I don't think I'll ever officially join another congregation.
I think I see what you mean.
Yeah.
But it seems to me the thing that's kind of more important to you, and maybe this is something that you kind of learned from SDA in general, is that they have a very rigid structure of how they do things.
Sure.
And that rigid structure is something that, in terms of like the modern world, almost seems like it's something that's lost. Mm-hmm. That families don't really need to do any sort of like rigid structure or something. But, the SDAs, they do have that rigid structure, and for a very specific reason, that they want to keep people together.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's something that is certainly commendable. And maybe it's something that you kind of view as like a parent, like, your kids, you raise them, you can't raise your kids not on a schedule.
Right? Sure.
And so it's kind of choosing like, what schedule am I going to run my kids on that's not going to, throw our life into complete disarray. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of similar to?
Yeah. And, I think that there is a aspect of this particularly Sabbath keeping with the SDA religion that I actually do agree with. Like, God only asks us for one day, right? Out of 7 days. And there's a couple of different trains of thought to this. Okay. So the Adventist thought would be, seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it you should do no work, you, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle is within your gates. Or I had the whole thing memorized at one point. Probably the only commandment I had completely memorized, because it was very emphasized. And what the SDAs will tell you is that is right there. There's only 10 laws, right? And that's one of them. It's right there next to murder. So it must be pretty important, right? Now, you guys ever listen to Dennis Prager?
Yes.
So Prager says you have to think about what was happening whenever like the book of Exodus was written. Like, basically we're trying to bring civilization to a bunch of savages. So what God was saying was, you got to give people a day off, man. You can't work everybody 7 days a week. But it is emphasized, and that is something I kind of struggle with, is the difference between the Seventh-day Sabbath and the First-day Sabbath, and like why it was changed. And but to go back to your initial question, I agree with that we need to observe this one day for God and for family. I think Mormons do something similar. Sunday is family day for them. We had a Mormon family that grew up across the street from us, and they weren't allowed to go outside and play football with us, or the boys weren't. They weren't allowed to come over and watch movies. They had to spend time with their family, and I do agree with that. It is something that I think is it probably, I don't want to say it's missing from the Catholic religion, because people observe, Sundays differently. It's very, like I said, like with the SDA religion, it's very regional, and that's probably the same thing with Catholicism.
Yeah, with like the Catholic Church, and just kind of speaking a little broadly on that, we in my family and kind of some of the friends I'm having now that who have kids, they're trying to keep Sundays just for church and family. So Saturday night, 9:00, phones off, don't touch it till Sunday night.
Yeah,
Stuff along like those lines. Go and get like donuts after church. Making
how Adventist of them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's just on the wrong day.
Yeah.
And I remember when my dad tried to enact that in our family, and growing up with a lot of kids, and like so a lot of parents. I mean, it's the first time when you're a parent. This is the first time you're a parent, so you don't really know what's going on. You don't know what you're doing. Just kind of figuring it out. And we'd always play baseball. We'd always go to church on Sunday, but we'd always just kind of do whatever else afterwards. And we just moved to Ohio, and he's like, just randomly one day, my dad's like, all right, no screens, nothing. We're all hanging out today on Sunday. No questions asked. And we're like, no, that's bull.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty similar to how it is, I think, with most Catholic families. I think that there is sort of like not a revolution, obviously, but just kind of like a rediscovery of what the Sabbath actually means, because I've definitely noticed it more in a lot of families, especially as kids get older. Like when kids are a little bit younger, it's a little bit tougher because you want them to do stuff. So it's like, okay, my son's going to play soccer. Unfortunately, soccer's literally decide to only schedule their soccer games on Sunday afternoons for whatever reason. So they just tend to do that. But as they kind of get older, those Sunday activities kind of start to slow down, I've noticed. And so it's easier for families to kind of ease back into that whole, we're taking Sunday off, we're just going to spend, because that's how it is with my family. I mean, it always kind of was like that for our family. We were never allowed to play sports on Sundays specifically.
Really?
And so, yeah, so I never, like teams, like obviously, we go to the front yard and play football,
Sure.
But I couldn't do any like travel teams for that reason.
Yeah.
I used to be really big into swimming and diving, winter swimming and diving. I couldn't really go to any big travel dive meets because they would be over the course of a whole weekend. So that was something that we always kind of did, and I think a lot of families did, but the modern Catholic family, especially just your typical Catholic person, I find nowadays is a little bit more secular, especially depending on where you go.
C&E Catholic.
Yes. Yeah. So there's just a lot of people that, they don't necessarily care about that, and it's not necessarily teaching that has ever been fully, I would say, taught, or maybe publicized is like the better word. It's not really publicized that much.
Sure.
Even the logical breakdown of just like relaxing one day a week, like that's good for anyone's mental health to grow as a family. Like game nights, you go out to dinner, like make it a day. Make the life around the family. That's what I've always liked about like those Sundays, is just relaxing.
No, and I have the 3 kids, and I think it would be positive for, screens are really hard for us right now. Like I've been putting limits on them. So they shut off at 9 o'clock at night because it's summer or whatever. And then I found out my son was getting up at like 7 a.m. and because I can look on the family link on how much he burns through, and so then I had to adjust it so he's not doing that. But I mean, yeah, to have to Sunday or Saturday or whatever as just a family day, I think is really positive and helps your family will be closer, and it'll be better off in the long run. Like I've always wanted my kids to get into chess because it promotes strategic thinking and problem solving, and I can't compete with like Among Us. Like I get it. You're moving little horsies on a board, and this you're like playing with all your friends. And,
yeah, it gets crazy.
Yeah.
Do you guys have VR? Like the virtual reality?
I have it for my PlayStation 4.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Among Us VR?
No.
Oh, it's crazy.
After this, you have to look it up. It's
pretty crazy.
It's bad.
Really?
Because you have adults that will go on it, and they're playing against like
10-year-olds,
5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, like little kids.
Really?
We call them squeakers, and they're just like making fun of them, yelling at them, like saying, like they're trying to kill them. They're running and screaming.
Oh my gosh!
It's hilarious. But yeah, it's just like chess is, I love chess. We all tried to get in chess during COVID in my family. And my little sister was like really good at it. But yeah, the strategic thinking, and then if you lose, it's like your fault a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's a really good mirror of life. So I mean, Andrew Tate talked about that.
Bronson's godparents, friends of ours, Andrew and Christy, they go to our parish, and they have 4 kids, and they play Among Us in their house, like as a game.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. We haven't tried it yet, but it sounded kind of neat. I don't know how the video game works. My son has been trying to convince me to play it because he wants, and I should, because my dad never played video games with me because he's from the 60s and 70s, right? Yeah. And Bronson will come down here and watch me playing like Call of Duty. And he's like, can I play? And thankfully I've got the one where you can shut the blood off. Yeah. And all the cursing. So I'm like, yeah, okay.
That's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah, Among Us is a rough game, but I mean, playing with your father, like those type of things, is like super, super fun.
Yeah,
I remember they used to play Call of Duty. He never let us play. He would get us like a little headset on, and you have a massage chair. So he's in there.
Oh, that's awesome! I always wanted one of those things. Ones that look like they're feeling like they're kneading in your back.
Yeah, back like before they were like really good. Where like so he's like, it was so bad. This headset on. Oh, it was beautiful. Like outside, it would be fun. It's funny. It was so funny.
Mm-hmm.
But no, that's one of the things, I mean, that the SDA religion instilled in me was like the importance of observing the Sabbath, and like I agree with that aspect of it. It's one of the things that I don't know if I'll ever get used to it, is drinking at church events. Like we have this thing is reverse raffle like a universal thing with Catholicism, because we have them in a bunch of different parishes around here, but they have a reverse raffle. It's a big fundraiser for the school, and we go to the school. It's not the church, it's the school attached to the church in the basement, and there's gambling and drinking, and like that still like throws me off every time I go in there. You guys ever seen the TV movie Jesus of Nazareth? Well, of course, I've seen it a million times because I could only watch certain things on one day a week.
Yeah.
But it's like a made-for-TV movie from the 70s, and it's very 70s. But the reenactment of the scene where Jesus comes to the synagogue and they're selling all the livestock and there's all the money changers, and he like takes the cane and bashes the tables. Mm-hmm. I always like get that feeling when I go to the reverse raffle. I'm like, is he going to show up? Is this cool? Are we allowed to do this?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that makes sense. No, I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, like the Catholics have always had a much different relationship, I would say, with like alcohol in general than every other. Like,
I get that.
Kind of like the puritanical revolution and stuff like that. Obviously, kind of changed the mindset of how we do that. There's actually there's something called the Augustinian beer diet, which is during Lent there were these monks, Augustinian monks, that instead of eating any food or drinking anything, they would only drink beer during the entire course of Lent, just drinking beer. Because it's wheat, and you can kind of get by on it.
Sure.
And we always joked when I was in college. It's like, what are you giving up for Lent? What are you giving up for Lent? I'm just gonna do the Augustinian beer diet. It's gonna be really nice. Funny. It's gonna be really nice for 3 days, and then it's gonna suck for the next 30 seconds.
Yeah, no kidding. Get all that hangover, you know.
I mean, you don't stop.
Well, I wonder why that is. Because like, so you know, I told you SDAs don't eat pork, and my mother is. You know, she doesn't consider herself SDA anymore, but she still won't eat it. She won't come over to my house. Like the first time I ever had ribs was my father-in-law made them for me. I was 25. It's the first time I ever had ribs. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I actually have 3 racks of frosting right now for tomorrow. Yeah. But my mother won't eat pulled pork, or she won't eat bacon. There is one thing, I call it the great Dilt's hypocrisy. So for some reason, my grandmother and my mom was the only person to observe the SDA religion out of her other three sisters. Kyla's grandma, I don't know what religion she is. I don't know either. And my other aunts weren't SDAs, but my grandma devout, my grandfather devout, my mother. But for some reason they eat pepperoni on pizza, and I'm like, what is this? This is bullcrap. This is pork. You know this is pork. And my grandma would just give this devilish laugh and just ignore it. And that was it. The problem solved. So I called it the great Dilt's hypocrisy, because nobody would ever explain it to me.
Yeah, no bacon pizza.
It's just like we just spoke about alcohol. Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding, right? His first miracle. Mm-hmm. And I would bring that up at Sabbath school or at my SDA school. I'm like, hey, what's the deal with this?
Yeah.
And just laugh it off.
Yeah,
Let's move on to the
it wasn't fermented because it didn't have enough time.
right.
You saying Jesus couldn't.
Or people talking about
Yeah.
Water.
people
wine,
talking about
Drake.
wine at the Last Supper. There's,
Yeah.
many people that drink alcohol.
I don't know
the whole Bible.
Yeah, I don't know the actual like theology behind it. You probably know better than I.
Well, think about this. Okay, so SDAs don't eat pork, right? And so I tried to explain to my mother, I think the reason why is because everyone's cooking over fires and dying of trichinosis. And nobody knew about germs back then, let alone trichinosis. So maybe that's why they're like, well, we'll just make a law saying you don't eat this so nobody dies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but remember, water can kill you, right? Dysentery or rickets or whatever. So I always thought maybe it was okay to drink alcohol because it was a way of hydrating yourself and you couldn't get dysentery. That's the reason why
it wasn't like strong like it is now.
Yeah.
You can't just go like drink that whiskey and like, oh, I'm hydrating myself. Like,
oh, well, yeah.
But like back then, that beer and that wine is nowhere near to where it was.
Sure.
Wasn't there a scripture in the Old Testament where they like casted a demon into pork or pigs of some
Yeah,
That's in the gospel.
Yeah.
That was Legion. There was a guy who was possessed by 100 demons.
Yes.
And it wasn't Jesus, it was a prophet. I think it might have been, I can't remember who it was, but he took the demons out and put it into a herd of pigs.
Yes.
And then the pigs ran off a cliff. Yeah.
We have this guy who's been commenting on a lot of our videos semi-recently.
Okay.
Actually, shout out to that guy because I love reading his comments. But he's a Seventh-day Adventist.
Really?
And yeah, he's they're all stuff like, this is, I feel so sorry for you people that, you've fallen into the religion of the Pope, and that, I really, really hope that you guys will come to Seventh-day Adventism or something like that. He claims that he was Catholic for like 35 years of his life. But his comments, every single time he says something, he makes a point, and they throws like 10 different verses of the Bible. And it's funny, like I'll kind of review these little things. So I'm like, okay, what's the point that he's trying to make here? And typically what I've noticed about, and maybe this is an overgeneralization, but I've noticed with the people when I talk about Seventh-day Adventism, everyone is so good at throwing verses, but they don't have like the context behind any of these verses. It's kind of like when they were taught that they were just taught like, this is the verse that disproves Roman Catholicism. It's John 14:15. Throw this to any Catholic. They don't know how to respond to it, and then compare it to Exodus 30:16 or something like that.
Sure.
And so he would have like all these different verses that he'd throw. There was one time where he was talking about Galatians or something like that, and he just threw a bunch of verses talking about how Galatians as a whole like letter just kind of disproved Roman Catholicism.
Very heavy on the Old Testament, I'm assuming, because because SDA religion is very focused on the Old Testament, and we kind of, I still say we kind of pigeonhole Catholicism into like basically saying they believe that the New Testament overrides the Old Testament, which is the reason why. So, for instance, the Seventh-day Sabbath, right? The belief, and I don't know if this is true, but the belief that we had, and I used to ask my mother, like, what do we believe and what do they believe? Like, I would have to like, get the juxtaposition, but we always believe that you said because Jesus rose on Sunday that he changed it. And there was actually a Seventh-day Adventist, I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he used to produce, you guys know what tracks are?
Yep.
Yeah, he had a track with $1 million bill, and on the back of it, it was like, if you can prove with the Bible that God changed the Sabbath, I'll give you $1 million, because he was rich, right? And I learned, and I don't know, you can correct me on this, because you're going to hate me when I say this, but I learned this from the Da Vinci Code, that the reason why the Sabbath was changed was because St. Augustine was trying to change the Roman Empire to Catholicism, but they were pagans and they were worshiping the sun on Sunday. So he thought it would be an easier transition for them to go to church on Sunday as opposed to Saturday.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that before. I don't think that it's true at all. I've seen some videos talk about it. If people want more information on that, I would just look up that same question that you just had, and then look up Catholic Answers or something like that.
Oh yeah, I've been on that website before.
They typically have pretty good answers. I think it happened way before St. Augustine, because St. Augustine was in like the 300s.
Yeah.
And I do believe that, I think it actually had to do more with the actual necessity of how Christians were able to worship. I've heard some people say, and I don't know that this is true, so and I wish we had
Yeah,
Brian
do your
fact check
research.
us.
Yeah.
Brian, you can fact check us. That because people already knew that Christians were people rounding up Christians, that they knew that they were worshiping on Saturdays, so that was just the easy place to find Christians was on that day. So you switch it to another day, and then all of a sudden, boom, now it becomes infinitely harder because they're worshiping on a day that you don't understand.
Sure.
I've heard some people say that happened in like cells. That's obviously not the general answer.
Yeah.
Because it changed canonically, obviously, between like we worship on Sundays, and that's an actual precept of the Catholic Church is to worship on Sundays, to go to Mass on Sundays.
But who's to say today is Saturday, for instance? Because like, when did they start observing leap years? Like, for all we know, based on the calendar of whatever, it could be Wednesday. Like it's just like if you got in a time machine and wanted to see the birth of Christ, if you set it to 0 BC, nothing would happen because of leap years. Jesus was actually born on 4 AD, I think.
Yeah, something. I've heard some people say stuff like that. Yeah, it has to do with the Julian calendar because that's the calendar that people were working with. And I mean, the Julian calendar sets apart something that is obviously much different than what would have obviously been previously understood by the Jews when the Jews were initially setting their dates for different things, right? So that's something that I think people don't necessarily take into account as well.
But like going back to like the knowledge of the Bible, so I mean, we would study the Bible like very consistently. Obviously, I went to Christian or a SDA school from 3rd grade to 7th grade, and so like I was immersed in the religion and the religious aspects of studying the Bible and relating pretty much everything back to the Bible. Like, I don't know what Catholics believe as far as the age of the earth. Like, they're like, SDAs are very textualist. They believe that the earth is only like 10,000 years old and that the world was literally created in 7 days. And I don't know how Catholicism interprets that. If it was like, I mean, a lot of people believe that evolution is real, but God like basically used evolution to create mankind. That is not the case with SDAs. We were told, like, for instance, that dinosaurs were created by men using gene splicing like thousands of years ago. Like, I was taught that when I was like in 3rd grade, and I believed it until I was in my 20s. And I told my friend who's got a biology degree and he's got a doctorate in pharmacology. And I said, "Oh yeah, gene splicing." He's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" But when we were kids, we used to play this game called Swords. Did you guys ever play Swords?
If you say what it is,
I don't know
maybe.
if it's an SDA game or if it's a Protestant game or whatever. No, it's definitely a Protestant game, and I'll tell you why. This is a funny story. So Swords is everybody would have their Bibles, okay? And then whoever was leading the group would say a verse, and you'd thumb through your Bible,
yes, I've heard
and then
this,
you would
yeah.
raise your sword in the air, whoever got it first, and then you'd have to read it to verify that you actually got there, right? So I could thumb through the Bible very quickly and find anything I wanted to. I always remembered Psalms is in the middle. And then, I would have we would also memorize entire books of not books of the Bible, but chapters sometimes. Like I remember I had an assignment to memorize 2 Corinthians something, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, for by it the elders obtained a good report. I can't remember the rest of it. But, so anyway, we had this, when I lived in Toledo, we had this vacant field next to a church and a funeral home in Perrysburg. And I used to just do innocent stuff there, like fly kites, and like maybe I'd have a friend and we'd play Frisbee. One day I'm flying a kite by myself, and this guy walks up to me and he says, "Hey, how you doing?" He introduces himself, and I was like, "Oh yeah, good." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm at this church here, and I'm running a vacation Bible school." I'm like, "Cool." He goes, "Are you hot?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm hot." He's like, "You thirsty?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you want a soda?" And I was like, "Cool." So I go over, and he's got a motorhome, right? So I go into his motorhome because I'm like, I was very innocent and naive, I guess you want to say. So he introduced me to his wife. They give me a Mountain Dew, and they said, "You want to come to our vacation Bible school?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" It was like, I don't remember what it was, like a Lutheran church, I think. So that night I go home and eating dinner with my family, and my dad says, "So what'd you do today?" So I told him. Present day federal agent, former police officer. His son just tells him he went into a pastor's motorhome and had a soda pop. He's like, "Okay, let's go." Like, took me over there and was very nice to the guy, but was like, "Listen, do you understand how bad this looks?" And the guy, I mean, some of those guys they're a little naive too, and so he's like, "I understand. Yeah. Can your son still come to my vacation Bible school?" And they're like, "Sure." So I show up, And this guy's thinking he just brought some heathen in off the street, and they play swords. He didn't see me coming.
I've been training with this my whole life.
Yep, I kicked all their butts.
Yeah.
And he's just looking at me like,
Yeah. He found his project.
Oh, yeah.
I got this.
I was like, I play swords all the time. What are you talking about?
We used to do that like growing up in a different kind of space. Also with a vacation Bible school, but you could always tell like the kids that were cheating because they had like little like sticky tabs.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they used to come those Bibles with the chapters like
Yes,
embedded
or they
in
would
the
have
pages.
the thing like indented into the pages.
Yeah.
Then you could be like, okay, you're cheating.
Those were banned in swords.
Really?
Yeah, we knew about those because I had my own. I had a Revelation Seminars Bible, which I think that might be. I'm not sure if that's an SDA specific thing, but we had this thing called the Revelation Seminars, and my mom used to go to it, and she would drag me to it when I was a kid, and I'd understand a lot of it, but it was all about the apocalypse and like basically interpreting Revelation. But you would get a Bible. So my mom gave me the Bible because she already had a nice one, and I got the little tabs, like the aftermarket tabs.
Yep.
And I had mine all marked up, and I got kicked out of swords for that one. They're like, no. But
Yeah, it's a really fascinating religion.
Yeah.
Seventh-day Adventism. I kind of like, I know it's obviously very different than other, but I'm just thinking like a lot of the Millerite kind of ideologies and stuff like that obviously kind of transferred over to Mormonism as well and stuff like that. And, to me...
Well, they're very similar. The time frames are similar, too, if you think about it.
They're almost the exact same. Yeah, they come from the same place in New York, I believe. I believe so. Someone can fact check me again.
Sure.
We don't have our fact checker, which really sucks.
Yeah.
But
there's a podcast, if you want to get a deep history of SDAism, and I'm gonna put a little disclaimer here. So there's a podcast called Cultish. Have you ever heard of that? It's really good, but they did a 4-parter on SDA. And there's a gentleman... I can't remember his name. I think his name is like Dale something. And he wrote a book on the SDA religion called The Cultish Doctrine, which actually right up there, that red book right there.
I see it, yeah.
Yeah. And a couple of his followers went on this Cultish podcast, and they gave out like a breakdown of the ideology of SDA. And it's very thorough because they're both the wives of former SDA ministers. Dale Raditz, I think his name is. He was a former SDA minister, and I'd say it's very correct. Where I disagree with them is where they go and say it's a full-blown cult, which I don't agree with. Whenever you say your religion was founded in the 1800s and your follower had visions, like there's a lot of red flags there, I understand. But at the same time, like no one tried to get me to have sex with them. Nobody took my money. They didn't scam me or anything. I don't feel as though that's right. And I also have a little issue whenever your religion is founded on opposing something. Okay. We're all Christians, right? By default, we oppose Satan, but we're not members of the Church of Anti-Satanists, So that's where I kind of depart from that. But,
yeah, that's actually a really, really solid thing to look out for, because you're kind of looking for, and I think that this is actually kind of like a fundamental problem with Protestantism, is that it starts off they're trying to kind of say something that's like pro, but actually what it does is it's anti-unity. What it really did from the foundation was that it just destroyed the unity of the church in Europe, really the unity of the church in the whole world as a result of that.
Sure.
And there's something that's fundamentally wrong about that. Obviously, there are certain things within the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, actual things that were brought up that were obviously extremely valid, things that needed to be changed, especially in terms of like indulgences and stuff like that.
You're talking about like Martin Luther.
Like Martin Luther,
yeah.
But, in the same thing with like Zwingli and Calvin, like every single one of them had something that they didn't necessarily like about the church and how it was being taught. And really, their issues were not necessarily with the church, and you can read this in their documents. Their issues were almost never with the church; it was with the people that were inside the church. And that's always the thing that you kind of find. I think, especially with cults, the thing that you always have to kind of look out for, because there are many cults that split off religions, especially with SDA. There are many cults that have split.
The Branch Davidians,
exactly.
That's in the name. Yeah,
exactly,
I mean he's one of the most, unfortunately, one of the most famous former Seventh-day Adventist, I guess you want to call it.
Yes.
Probably the most famous Seventh-day Adventist right now is Dr. Ben Carson. He was the HUD secretary under Trump.
Yeah, he's an extremely smart guy.
Yeah, he actually came to our church and was signing when he was touring on his autobiography, Gifted Hands. I actually read that book when I was in the 3rd grade. It was almost required reading because he was it's a very, very, very good book. But,
yeah, you have to look out for those hidden knowledge things, like the Gnostic idea of what Gnosticism is. What kind of creates cults in my idea. Like it's like you join a church and all of a sudden you're going to gain this like hidden knowledge that's not there before you actually join the church.
Yeah, SDA is pretty. I mean,
they're pretty open.
They're pretty open. There was a time when, and this is covered during that 4-part podcast, so I don't want to repeat anything. If anybody wants to go listen to that. But there was a time, there's a book called King of the Cults that came out in, I think, the 70s or 80s, and SDAism ended up in that book, but it was in the appendices, and it said, oh no, they're not a cult, but I think the SDA church kind of misrepresented their doctrine. Like, so for instance, are you familiar with investigative judgment in the SDA religion? So you guys believe that if you ask forgiveness for a sin, you're wiped clean and you're good to go, right? After confession, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. I have to say that everybody knows that. It's at every concert I've ever been to. But you know, you're saved by the grace of God, right? SDA investigative judgment is very works based, believe it or not. Like, they believe that there is literally a ledger based on your good deeds and your bad deeds. And when it's time to decide when you're going to get into heaven, you will be judged, investigatively judged by your actions and your thoughts and your works. Okay.
That is really interesting that you bring that up.
So there were these children's stories that I would listen to when I was a kid, called Uncle Dan and Aunt Ann. And I remember one very specifically where a girl has a dream about the investigative judgment, and whether it's God or Jesus or whoever is reading from her ledger, and she physically starts to get smaller as they mention her sins. But then somebody from her class that they may be judged or something, she goes up to be judged and she begins to get taller. And it used to freak me out when I was a kid. But whenever, it's kind of funny because whenever that King of the Cults came out, the SDA church actually released a book. It's actually right up there, that green book 2 away from my huge Holy Bible. I think it's called Questions on Doctrine.
Yes.
And it was sent to like lawyers, and like that one I got at an estate sale, and it was like sent to a law office for some reason in Michigan. But it was all of the doctrines of the SDA church that were provided to that author from King of the Cults. And there's some stuff in there that like I said, I'm not a theologian. I'm not as up on the SDA doctrine as the folks that were on that podcast were. But even me, I know that there's some stuff in there that doesn't fully represent. And it's not hidden. Like, it's right there. Like, do you know the Adventists have their own Bible? It's called the Clear Word. Have you ever read that?
I've not read it, but I know that it exists.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially if you read Daniel 8:15. Mm-hmm. It goes from 3 sentences to about a page and a half.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. So
is it? You said it's really regionalized though. So like where you were at here, it was a little bit more. You said liberal,
correct?
Where like maybe.
So SDA is very big on education and medical. So there's a lot of hospitals that are affiliated with the SDA church. So for instance, Loma Linda in California is a big one. You know Kevin Smith, the film guy, Jay and Silent Bob.
Yes.
You ever heard of that?
I'm so bad with movies.
That's all right.
I feel bad whenever I come.
Mallrats, Clerks.
Yes.
He wrote all those movies. But anyway, he had I don't remember what happened to him, but he had a massive heart attack. And I remember I was listening to his podcast, which is disgusting. I don't recommend it, but I used to listen to it. And he was talking about how this Seventh-day Adventist saved his life because he ended up at the hospital. But to answer your question, the closer you get to those centers, so universities, for instance, you have Andrews University in Michigan. You have Southern, you have Loma Linda. There used to be one in the north called Walla Walla, I think. You'll get more of your conservative, especially near Andrews University, which is like the mecca of the SDA church. I've never been there, actually. It's only like 3 hours away, and I've never been there. But and then they're big on boarding schools. They have a boarding school in pretty much every state. Another interesting thing is that they're big on camps, like day camps. And we used to have one in Punxsutawney. In fact, it was called the Lower Lake Camp, and I had free run of it when I was a kid. Can you imagine having free run of a summer camp when you're like 6-7 years old? It was a blast.
It's a dream.
Yeah. Like there was no like, maniac hunting me. It was all very innocent. But we have our own Boy Scouts called the Pathfinders. So I was in Boy Scouts when I was younger because there was no Pathfinder chapters in Punxsutawney. And when I moved out here, I joined Pathfinders. And it's kind of interesting because they teach a thing called pioneering, which is navigation with a map and compass. And then they teach how to spot edible plants. And a lot of it is very good, not tying all the stuff you would do in Boy Scouts, but a lot of it is training for what they call the time of trouble, when you're going to be hunted and you have to be able to navigate. This is before cell phones, obviously, so you had to learn how to navigate with a map and a compass because you're on the run, and you had to know about edible plants because you can't eat meat.
You can't go hunting.
Right.
There was a similar thing that happened in the Mormon church, I know, in the 90s, where there was like, I don't know, maybe this was kind of like a collaborative thing almost between just that kind of, we'll say like genre of Christianity or something like that, where people knew the end of the world was coming. And I know that there was some, like in the Mormon church, the head of their church is obviously called like the prophet.
Yeah.
I think someone had like a big date in like 2004, like that was going to be the end or something like that. And they did the same thing.
Was that the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints? FLDS?
Yes, I think it was the FLDS, which is also like I think it is a cult.
FLDS is definitely a cult. I stayed in their cult leader's house.
Warren
Jeffs. Yeah,
no
I
way.
stayed in his house for 2 days.
Okay, well,
We'll get
We'll get
to
back-
and then we'll hear that.
Okay.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
I actually just watched like a freaking huge.
Keep Sweet?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched the documentary after I stayed in his house.
Did you?
Then I was like, oh God, I should not have done that.
Yeah. Well, the same thing I was going to say is that, they taught like, you need to learn these survival skills because you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that seems like almost so sinister about that. I don't know.
Well, the FLDS is a sinister religion. I mean, they're exploiting children, and like I wouldn't even speak about with SDAism and FLDS in the same breath because like especially after watching that documentary, oh my God. Yeah. Like that and it's
pretty bad. But I mean, he's gone. There's a YouTube channel on that guy named Peter something, and he actually just went to that place in Arizona to go see, because obviously Warren Jeffs is
Colorado City, Arizona.
I've been there, which is a funny name, because it's in Arizona. But
shoot, I almost wore the shirt from. There's one bar in that town called Edge of the World Brewery, and when I stayed there with my whole family, and I went there, and then my parents went to Zion and Bryce Canyon a couple weeks ago, and they're like, "We're gonna go to where they always do. They like do go in places that I go, and they're like, we're gonna go to the FLDS community." I was like, "Don't. There's nothing there." Yeah. And they went and they came back. I asked them to get me the shirt from this bar, and they got me the shirt, and they're like, "Yeah, there was nothing there." I'm like, "I told you."
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Like it's basically a whole city. Obviously not a very big city. And this guy was going there now. Obviously, a lot of the houses that these people basically built to kind of like follow Warren Jeffs are basically
they're abandoned.
But it's a bunch of abandoned houses that are relatively new because they were all built in the 90s. So it's like nice kind of looking.
It's actually really weird. So.
Okay, tell us about this.
Okay, so I during COVID, I got laid off for a couple of weeks. They called it I got unpaid leave, and then my wife lost her job. So I told my wife, I was like, "Hey, let's go out west with the kids, and we're never going to get 2 weeks off like this ever again." I was furloughed for 2 weeks, so we packed all our stuff. We packed a bunch of camping gear, and we flew to Rapid City, South Dakota, rented a car, and did this big loop. Hit a bunch of national parks, went to the Grand Canyon, went to Yellowstone. So we were kind of just winging it. We didn't have any accommodations. There was like a couple campgrounds, like in Yellowstone, we had reservations because you had to. But we were just getting motor lodges and hotels, Airbnbs, whatever we could as we made this nice circle. So we wanted to go to Bryce and Zion. And I'm looking through Airbnbs and through like hotels.com, and I find this B&B called Most Wanted Bed and Breakfast. And I was like, well, this is cool. So I kind of look at the history of it, and they're like, this is Warren Jeffs' old cult compound, and because he had 99 wives, there's 1 million bedrooms, so it's just like a hotel now. Yeah. And I was like, okay, it was $100 a night. Our room was 3 times the size of this office. It was huge. It had 3 TVs, and I found out later it was Warren Jeffs' bedroom. It was called the Most Wanted Suite. Okay. So So we go there, and the reason I picked it is because it was kind of like halfway in between Bryce and Zion. So for me, it was perfect. But the town is bizarre. So it's exactly the way you described it, only it's weirder because they have all these like what we would call a shotgun shack, which is you could blast a shotgun through the front door and it would bust out the end of the house. And then there would be these mini mansions. And so what I hypothesized was the mini mansions must have been the husband, and the little were like the sister wives would stay in the little shacks, right? And the reason it was abandoned is because when Jeffs went to prison, there was like a sect of that cult that moved to British Columbia, I believe, right on the Idaho border. And if you go to that city, that's like the new Colorado city up there. And this place is pretty much abandoned. But
doesn't he have a lot of followers that basically escaped and just kind of like shot all over?
Yeah, but there's still some in Texas because he built a church in Texas, I believe. And then there's still some that are in Colorado City. The weird thing about fundamentalist Mormons too is they're allowed to drink. So there's a Family Dollar, which is like the only store in Colorado City, Utah. And I took a picture of this. I'll send it to you sometime. But there's a woman in like the conservative Mormon garb, like the flower print dress, like pushing a cart full of White Claws. And I was like, oh man, I didn't even care if she saw me. And if you look at the picture, you could tell she totally saw me take the picture.
It's like you just had to take a photo of like, I need to remember this.
Yeah, it was crazy. But I have pictures of the whole community. You can go on YouTube where people drive through the town. And it has
Google
creepy.
Street View throughout the whole town. So like you can go through and just see like, and they're updated photos because someone recently went there in like probably 2023, so you can see the whole city. And it's really, like you said, it's so bizarre because they're not old buildings. It's new infrastructure.
Did you notice the big privacy walls? Like they don't want anybody looking in their backyards. There's like these cinder block walls that are like 6-8 foot high.
And then there's a whole section of the city too where you can tell that that's when crap started to like really flow through the gutter. Because they're like, there's a bunch of buildings that are basically like half under construction, but you can tell that they just got abandoned because they couldn't finish the project because they ran out of money or something. I don't know.
That bed and breakfast is awesome, though. Like, quick shout out to Most Wanted B&B. It's still in operation. I got a coffee mug from them that like disintegrated in the dishwasher, so I needed that shirt. But the bizarre thing about that hotel is you walk in and you're like, something's off with this place. You can tell it wasn't supposed to be a hotel. Like the carpet's too plush. There's still a podium. What do you call it that you preach in front of not an altar, but a pulpit. There's still a pulpit in the main area that Warren Jeffs used to preach behind. I got pictures of all this stuff, man.
Wow.
And then the funny thing is there's other travelers that were booking the place, and you could tell they're looking around and they're like, something's not right. And my favorite thing, the 3 days we were there, 2 nights, 3 days, was to like, you don't know where you're at right now, do you? And I get to explain to them. And then like Janine would be in our room with the kids, and like I'd just pop in with strangers. I'm like, check this thing out. Like, I'm pretty sure this was his bedroom. And then I went back, and 2 years later, that Netflix documentary comes out, and I watched it. I was like, oh man, I should not have been there.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing, because it truly is in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of nowhere. So that's why it's so phenomenal. Like, it's crazy that, like, out of every single place you could have gone to traveling in the United States, you ended up in Warren Jeffs' house. And didn't even know it, because people are staying there, but they're staying there for a very specific reason of, like, this is Warren Jeffs' house. It's I just want to see where he lives.
It's like morbid tourism, I think.
Yes. That's blacklisted tourism. That's crazy. Wow. That's so random. But it's did you get like a kind of like a, did you ever feel scared type sense?
No. You mean like walking around the town or at the B&B?
So what I mean is basically, I guess because maybe you didn't really realize, the full extent of what had happened there. But, when I go to places like that, I get this, for example, I went to World Youth Day, which is like a big Catholic conference of like all the teenagers in the world. I went to Poland in 2016, and I went to Auschwitz, and this is kind of like, it's just something like another example to kind of bring up like what my mental was feeling.
Sure.
We went to Auschwitz, and Auschwitz is a really weird place to go visit.
Yeah, my wife was just there a couple weeks ago.
Yes, and like, because you get the sense we're walking around.
Evil was committed here.
Yes, and like people are taking photos and stuff like that, and it just felt really weird and really off. And I just felt really uncomfortable the whole time that I was there.
I didn't feel uncomfortable. And I think the reason is because, yes, the things that happened there. And now I know. And if I would have known what I know now, maybe my feelings would have been different. The sexual exploitation that happens in those cults is terrible. one of the things that you got to give Christianity credit for is whenever a cult busts off of us, we don't really murder people, right?
Right. Hopefully.
Like, no, but we don't.
No, yeah,
Dude,
we don't.
there's no like FLDS is a terrible religion, but at the same time, they're not strapping suicide vests to themselves and
No.
Yeah.
blowing things up, right?
You're 100%.
Yeah.
So when I'm in places like that, now granted, if I would have known what I know now about Jeff's, I mean, you can't, if you watch that documentary and you hear that audio tape, it's disturbing. And I probably never would have booked the place, but no, I never felt, and the folks there, and like, as far as fearing for your, safety, again, they exploit their own kind. They're not really, I don't know if they're very evangelical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know
like,
what you mean.
like,
Well, like we said before, they have that kind of Gnostic sense. Like you're either in the group or you're not in
Right.
the group. And that's what I heard was that, these people that are over there tend to be very, very like not territorial because they're not defending their land. They're open to people coming in.
they're private.
But yeah, they're private.
Yeah.
Like if you come in, they're not going to tell you about their whole life and all their ins and outs of like everything that they truly believe.
Well,
So,
we're heretics to them, right? So
yeah.
it's like the Branch Davidians. They weren't out there trying. Well, sometimes they were, but like they built a compound for a reason. They weren't out there knocking on doors and handing out literature. They wanted to be left alone. That was an interesting time whenever Waco happened because, I think about that guy. That guy was raised as an Adventist, and then the government comes to his door with tanks. Like, you basically just proved the dude right, like, this is it, guys. And then also my father being a federal agent when that happened, that made for a couple of awkward church attendants, I mean, he wasn't in the ATF, but yeah.
By the way, we're just going to take a really quick break.
Sure. We're back. Sorry. Sometimes it's really hard editing. It's like, all right, when do we jump back into the conversation? But now we're talking about not having plumbing, if y'all have plumbing. But
Yeah, I let them. So Mike asked me if I'd golf. I said I just started this year, which is weird being 43 years old and just starting golf. But I told him, considering both my parents didn't grow up with indoor plumbing, leisure sports weren't a big focus in our family. So my dad didn't play golf. I don't think any of my cousins my cousins do, but none of my aunts and uncles do.
yeah, because you're in the business world too.
Mm-hmm. And that was it's kind of
Some have to do it.
Well, you have to do it, and you can't suck because people lose respect for you.
Yeah.
So I started actually taking golf lessons this year. I meet my instructor at a driving range, and then he helps me work on my swing, which he needs to help me on my hook because I shot 18 last week, and man, I lost so many balls. And I'm shooting 18 tomorrow too, so I think I'm just going to start aiming hard left.
Just wait.
But the thing is, as soon as you start to do that, it goes
straight
the
down.
other way, or it goes straight. Yeah.
I was playing a really nice golf course. I had invited to back in Illinois, and I played baseball, so my swing was I always hooked. And
That's my problem.
yeah, it took me 7 years to be able to hit it straight. So
Okay.
good. It's not easy.
Sorry, I'm
Sucks.
still eating my granola bar.
No, you're good. The good kind too from Costco. But there was a lot of nice houses, and it was a perfect like dog leg. So I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna aim at the houses. It's gonna do what it does. Straight at the houses. I just got in the cart and just went to the next. I just left. It was so bad.
I'll tell you a funny story. So the first time I was asked to play golf, I was working as a sales manager for Owens Corning. My biggest customer out of Pittsburgh. They would do this golf outing, and they said, and I had to pay for it because they were my customer, but I also have to play. I don't have any golf clubs. I never played golf. I played baseball. I'm like, how hard could it be to hit the little ball? Whatever. So I said something to my father, and I said, I don't have any golf clubs. And he goes, I got you. So there's this flea market out on Fremont Road in Fremont, Ohio, and he bought me a set of golf clubs in a bag with they had wooden shafts and and they were old, right? I don't know any better. So I show up to this golf outing, and it is my biggest customers. There's 25, 30 people there, probably more. And it's at that Jack Nicklaus course in Columbus, probably the
Muirfield Village.
maybe it's
That's his big course.
it's probably the best golf course in the state of Ohio. There's people wearing the all white and playing croquet, and I show up. I don't even have golf shoes or anything. I show up wearing my Adidas slides with a bag of clubs from the 50s, and these guys laughed at me so much and were calling me old school. By the end of the day, my clubs were bouncing out of the golf bag and falling on the ground, and I just didn't even give a crap.
Yeah,
I think
they
I
probably thought you were joking with them.
yeah.
At first.
They thought I was being ironic. Yeah.
And you're being insincere as you possibly can.
Right. I went to Dick's and I bought a set of Top Flights because it's the cheapest ones I could get, and I still use them. I mean, because I just, like I said, they sat in my garage for like 9 years, and then I was like, okay. I went out on a golf. I remember this Catholic charity called 33 for shout out to 33 for Charity, and they do a golf outing every year. And so they're like, "Oh, you got to play." So I went, and I always tell the foursome, and it's a scramble, so that helps. I'm like, "Listen, I suck. I'm probably not even going to drive because it's so laughable, but I can still do short game. I can chip and putt and whatever." And I got out there. I'm like, man, this is fun. I've been missing out, being outside, drinking beers.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
The camaraderie, it's fantastic.
There's some video that I saw of this guy. It's like a little YouTube short, but this guy is golfing with his friends. He's like, guys, they're like 5 holes in. I'm not really feeling this. This is kind of boring. It's really not my thing. I'm really not playing that well. Goes up to the ball, swings, hits it onto the green perfectly from like 150 yards, and then boom, the mentality changes. Like, I'm going to devote the rest of my life to this. This sport is incredible. I love this. This is the greatest game that's ever been invented. It takes one good shot to get you hooked.
Because I'm this feeling. I'm gonna chase this feeling for the rest of my life.
I tell everyone that I golf with that, if you're having a bad round or something like that, I always say to them, we don't golf to have a good round. We golf to have a good shot. Something that at the end of the round you can go back to your wife and say, honey, I got to tell you about this shot.
Yeah.
On the 17th fairway, boom, it was perfect. And then that's it.
You don't tell them about all the hooks and slides.
No, and never the next shot.
You don't tell them about the pack of balls you had to buy right after the round.
Right. We were shooting, we shot 18 at this course last week called River Bee. It's right on the river, the Maumee River. So like the back nine is super wicked because it follows the contours of the river. And there was a foursome in front of us that were probably played golf as many times as I have, which I can count on my left hand. And but they weren't, they were searching for every ball. They were taking so long that we skipped a par 3 to get around them, and then we took our hot dog break on the turn, and there was another foursome behind us by the time we got back, which means somebody else skipped them. And I was like, good God, I'm so good. We were playing best shot, so that was nice.
That's what you do. Like there's an etiquette with it. Like if you're not that good, you don't look for all your balls. You play best shot. You kind of make it,
or you offer to play through the people to play through.
Oh yeah, people that just block you out are rough. But a nice hard segue back into kind of what we're talking about a little bit. Talking about faith a little bit and just growing up in different religions. You mentioned how you're going to raise your kids as Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're kind of still don't think you're going to convert to Catholicism and other things. But I was just kind of curious, like your relationship with just like God, just talking just in general, how that plays into your everyday life, and if it's how you're growing there, fostering them.
I mean, having kids helped redirect me. I wouldn't say I was lost until I started having children, but I was probably living more of a secular lifestyle. God's always in my spiritual. I hate when people say I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I think that's so lame. Oh. But I mean, God was always in my mind. I was raised very well by my parents to have a moral compass that was tied to God and Jesus Christ. I wanted to make sure that my children grew up with the same moral compass. And that has a lot to do with you can't just be a CNE Catholic, or you can't just go to mass and like zone out, but you actually have to relate it to your daily life and make sure it's translating into your decision making. Could my relationship with God be better? I don't think anybody can say no to that question. But again, I mean, my kids ask me a lot of questions, and that helps me reflect on my own relationship with God and how strong it is. Again, like I said, it obviously could be stronger. If I picked a team, would it be stronger? Maybe. Because I would probably, like, as you can see behind you, I'm a big history buff. So if I get into anything, I want to know everything about it. And the more you read, and the more you study, and the more time you devote to it, the better off you're going to be. So that's probably a hindrance. But also, I'm very stubborn. And the fact that I don't want to join the team also makes me do a little more research.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
No, yeah, that's beautiful. That's why, like, we kind of talked about when we took that little break, is it's real. Like, we're talking, it's not like, all right, we're coming here, it's like, all right, we're going to make you Catholic. We just want to get your opinions on things and letting people, like, walk through.
I'm a bit of a unicorn when it comes to, because I'm special.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a unicorn when it comes to ex-SDAs because, so this is a weird story. So there was a kid that I went to SDA school with. He was the minister's, I don't know if I should say that. So in Toledo, there's 3 SDA churches. There's the one in Swanton, there's one in Sylvania, and then there's one in Parkwood. And Parkwood is the quote unquote black church. And I don't want to see the SDAs self-segregate because they really don't. I think it has to do with geography in Toledo, all right? So this kid was the minister's grandson. And I was like, man, I wonder whatever happened to that dude. So I looked him up on Facebook and I see him and he's doing like, I don't know, like pictures of like wads of cash and stuff. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So I saw his last Facebook post was from 2019 and I'm like, So I Googled his name in obituary and nothing came up. And I was like, well, that's good. And I'm like, So I Googled his name and arrest or incarceration. And he beat his weed dealer to death with a baseball bat and dumped his body under an overpass in Columbus. And I'm like, holy crap, Dino. Like, I couldn't believe he did this, right? And so I started reaching out to a lot of my former classmates at the SDA school. It's not hard. There was only like 10 of us in the class. And I was like, did you know about this? Send them the link. And I started kind of catching up with a lot of people. And I came to realize that I think all of the people that I went to school with, none of them are in SDA anymore. And most of them are either atheists or agnostics. Wow. There was one of my friends that lives down in Dayton that still goes, I think he goes to non-denominational church. But almost all of them, my one friend Sarah, I asked her, I said, are you raising your kids religious? And she goes, no, we don't really, we have our own religion. It's called Don't Be a A-hole. And I was like, okay, that's a compass, I guess. Yeah. But then I got onto the ex-Adventist Reddit because I'm like, I started asking myself a lot of questions, like questioning, because there is a certain worldview that you do adopt being an Adventist, and when you get out of it, you don't realize how much of that religion you can leave the church physically and spiritually, but you don't realize how much of it is still in your belief system. Like the state of the dead, I still don't understand the state of the dead, and we'll get into that in a second, but I went on Reddit and it's almost all atheists, and they're the worst kind of atheists too, because they're what I call evangelical atheists, and the aggressive ones. They're like, no, join us. God doesn't exist. Nihilism. Yeah.
It's like that scene from The Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
It's like, we are nihilists.
We don't believe in nothing, Lebowski. Like, what is the one guy said? He goes, say what you want about the socialists, but at least it's an ethos, dude.
Yes. Oh man, that's so funny. Yeah, it is interesting seeing people that tend to leave different types of religions. You're definitely right, because there's some people that I think really, if they have any sort of like bad experiences in their childhood or something like that, there's some sort of unspoken trauma, they usually will kind of connect it to just something that seems like the most obvious. And usually that's the biggest thing that happened in their childhood. And obviously, like if you're in religion, a religion is obviously to a lot of kids, it's going to be one of the biggest things.
Sure. And I think that, as far as trauma goes, that nothing like that ever happened to me. I like I said before, I have nothing but good memories from my experiences in the SDA schools, the SDA religion. I went to the summer camps. They tried to get me to go to boarding school, but I think my parents would have sent me if it wasn't for the money. Yeah. But I had nothing but positive experiences. The education, it ended up waning there towards the end, which is why my parents put me in public school after 7th grade. I started at Perrysburg, and I was like a year behind everybody else. I was shocked when I went in, but it had nothing to do with my previous educators. I'm actually still friends with a lot of my teachers. I just had my 3rd and 4th grade teacher. They combined the grades in my school. 3rd and 4th were in the same. I just had my 3rd grade teacher over for dinner like about 3 or 4 months ago. Her name's Cecilia Peoples. Shout out Cecilia Peoples. Yeah. I was best friends. Her son unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, and him and I were like best friends. We like spent the night at each other's houses. And but Mrs. Prest, she's got to be in her 90s. I'm friends with her on Facebook. Argenta LeBlanc was my 5th grade teacher. She like encouraged me in my love of reading. She used to give me like Robinson Crusoe and Treasure Island, and like she's pretty much responsible for this wall behind you guys.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
but-
I think that's something people just need to realize in general is that, good people do exist.
Yeah.
And they exist in every single facet of life, especially like, especially with, SDA, they have a very, very, like you said, they have a very strong moral compass.
Yeah.
And, that teaches you a lot. And it's all good stuff. And it's stuff that's extremely necessary.
Most of it. Yeah.
And they're trying
Hopefully,
and they're trying to do right by God, and they're trying to find that way.
Sure.
And that's what I really like about just Christians in general. Like if you're genuinely trying to find truth and build that relationship with God and build community, all power to you. That's beautiful. That's what the world needs. It's just healing.
And SDA is like, they're a lot more open than they used to be, like even in the early 90s. Like, for instance, my wedding was co-officiated by an SDA minister and I don't believe that, I don't know if the church wouldn't allow it. One Catholic church we approached was St. Hedwig in downtown Toledo. It was built by my wife's grandfather helped build it, or great grandfather. Like it's in the old Polish neighborhood. My wife's like, I'd really want to get married. It's demolished now, but my wife's like, I really want to get married here. And they were like, absolutely not. There's no way we're going to let an SDA minister co-officiate here. But I was at a 4th of July party, obviously on the 4th of July. And the minister, or the priest at our church right now, Father Eric, was kind of jibing me about being an SDA. And the guy that married us, Deacon Joe, was there, and he was like, "Oh no, I remember the SDA minister, Mike Fortune." He's like, "What a great guy," and like 30 years ago, that never would have happened.
Yeah, it's funny. But that's one thing that we're actually really excited with, like this podcast and just kind of putting more like Christian ideas and Catholic ideas out into the internet, is trying to just build that melting pot and get that bridge back. We were talking, I think Thursday night, about just the show The Chosen, and how it's a conglomeration of a bunch of Christian denominations, Catholics.
I've never seen it before.
It's actually fantastic.
Yeah.
It's recorded very well.
My parents go to the screenings or whatever, I believe.
Yeah. Grandma Sandy always talks about it. They absolutely love it. We actually, sometime in either August or September, we're going to have people on the podcast that were actors on.
Right on.
For 3 seasons.
Oh, that's great.
They're really awesome. But that's just kind of bridging that gap, just understanding like, we're all Christians. We're all trying to follow Christ. Mm-hmm. Let's focus on that rather than just start pointing at all of our differences.
Well, there's a lot bigger battles to fight and a lot bigger enemies to fight than among us, to borrow a video game term. Yeah. But I don't think Satan would revel in anything more than religious infighting. Like I was saying about the state of the dead, like that was always a hang up. Have you ever heard about the comma thing?
No, sorry, go ahead.
That was my phone. No, have you ever heard about the comma thing? Like, the repentant thief on the...
Yes.
And like Jesus says to him, I say unto you, today you will be with me in paradise. Mm-hmm. Or did he say, I say unto you, today you will be with me in paradise? The position of that comma can tell you whether when that guy dies, he goes straight to heaven or maybe not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Those are things that we would always ponder. And I would be like, man, that one comma really does make a big... But so here's another thing too, and I talked to this actually to Father Eric. I said one of the greatest things that I love hearing whenever Mass starts is whenever he talks about studying the great mysteries, because I think that's such a great descriptor of the Bible and of religion. There's a lot of mysteries there, and like I said, I don't want to. I will never follow anybody ever again that says they have all the answers. And as long as you don't claim to have all the answers, you're like, hey, we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure it out. Then I respect that a lot.
Yeah, the open honesty. I mean, it's hard. I mean, when you have faith is like, it's not a tangible thing.
No.
It's just, it's a belief. It's a confidence in something. And that's one thing that I'd love to focus on and just continue to grow that. One thing you also kind of mentioned is how your faith kind of grew a little bit when you became a father. Mm-hmm. So Ben, you have he's 4 months old. Mm-hmm. And I'm obviously, Kai's very pregnant. We're hopefully in the next couple of weeks have a son coming here. And I was wondering if you had any advice or just things you've learned being a father that you would like to make to share.
There's too much, probably.
Patience is one that I struggle with all the time, especially when you have multiple kids, and making sure that your children, that what they're saying is important. And it's really hard too, because they say a lot of stuff that isn't important. one of the things that always frustrated me the most about what my parents and what other people would say to me when my kids were little is that cherish every moment because it goes by in an instant. And they're right, it does. You'll in a blink of an eye, your kids are shaving, you know? Like my kids aren't there yet, but it's really hard though, because parenting is difficult. It's not just a Kodak moment every time, you know? Like, but we have a third child now, right? So I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 13-month-old. So like I'm not trying to say I'm gonna do everything right with this one, screw those other two. Yeah. But there are lessons that I definitely learned, especially with patience, and and it's also hard because that child takes focus away from my other two, and I can't, like, they still need me. They're not grown yet, and even when they're grown, they're still gonna need me. But I mean, I guess my biggest advice is to just life gets really busy, and just slow down and cherish moments, but also like get into positive routines. Like we do, my mom started bedtime prayers with me every morning or every night. We would kneel down at my bed and say a prayer. And one of the things about Catholicism is your prayers are more rehearsed than they are from the heart. Like you say, you know, your what do you call it? The
Hail Marys.
Hail Marys or Our Father. And Protestants a lot of times will speak from the heart, or I'll pat myself on the back. I'm really good at prayer. Like if somebody says, all right, Ben, we're going to eat. Ben, would you like to say prayer? Like I can right off the top of the dome. And that's not me. That's the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. And I encourage my kids to do that because it allows them to vocalize maybe things that they're feeling. And it might be a little bit of cheating, but I get to hear what's going on in their head by, like, you know, using prayer as a conduit, kind of, not only for the Lord to help them, but for me by His grace to help them. So I think that's a little advice I'd give you, I guess.
I love that. Yeah, that's one thing that I've been trying to work on more is like the open prayer. As like in the Catholic Church, like a lot of times it's like you like Hail Mary, Glory be, Our Father. You kind of just it gets a little bit more rehearsed. And we had a Lenten mission, I think 2 years ago at St. Sebastian's, where I attend Mass, and it was all about the different types of prayer and how to meditative prayer and all those types of things, and focusing on Scripture and kind of opening us up more to that. Just God speaks to everyone different ways. Mm-hmm. So like for me, I don't ever hear God, but I feel peace. So I like to go to like a church where it's quiet, nothing's going on, and that's where I have more of that relationship kind of thing with God there. But this has been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time, letting us come in your basement. Yeah. But one thing we like our guests to do, you kind of already did a little bit at the end of the podcast, give a little call to action or leave a final thought with our audience. So this is your time for that. That's your camera right there.
Okay.
No pressure. Yeah, we're sending it to Aunt Pam.
I don't know what my call to action would be. I guess I don't want to sound like some sort of 1960s era radical, but I guess my call to action would be question everything. I was told as a child when I would question things that people that were smarter than me have already figured that out. So just do as I say, basically. And it took me a while before. And confidence had a lot to do with it. I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself when I was younger, so it took me a while to be like, no, I'm smart. I'm going to figure out why this is. So just question everything, do research, and that's pretty much it.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And that's exactly. Check out the merch. The merch is in the description.
Awesome.
And, we'll see you next time.